What if I told you that the education system is doing to your children exactly what it tried to do to me? What if the schools that claim to develop genius are actually destroying it, systematically crushing curiosity, punishing independent thought, and turning vibrant young minds into obedient robots? And what if I could show you a completely different path, one that I stumbled onto by accident, one that the establishment hated, but one that actually works? Stay with me, because I'm about to dismantle everything you believe about education, and I'm going to show you why the secret to raising brilliant, creative, capable human beings has nothing to do with classrooms, curriculum, or standardized tests. Because I'm living proof that the system doesn't work, and I'm going to tell you exactly what does. My name is Albert Einstein, and I was a failure. At least that's what my teachers said. I didn't speak until I was 4 years old. I struggled in school. My Greek teacher told me I would never amount to anything. I was expelled from gymnasium. I failed my first attempt at university entrance exams. By every measure the education system uses to evaluate students, I was deficient, inadequate, a lost cause. And thank God for that, because if I had succeeded in their system, if I had been the obedient student they wanted, I never would have developed the way of thinking that led to relativity, never would have questioned the assumptions everyone else accepted, never would have seen what others couldn't see. The education system didn't create my genius, it nearly destroyed it. And only by escaping that system, by learning in my own way, on my own terms, driven by my own curiosity, did I become who I became. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Not about physics, but about learning, about education, about how we're destroying an entire generation of Einsteins by forcing them through a system designed not to educate, but to indoctrinate, to produce compliant workers, not independent thinkers, and about what we should be doing instead. Let me tell you what school was like for me. Unbearable. The gymnasium in Munich, where I spent my teenage years, it was a prison, authoritarian, rigid, focused entirely on memorization and obedience. The teachers lectured, we sat silently, we memorized facts, we regurgitated them on exams. And if you questioned anything, if you challenged the teacher, if you showed any independence of thought, you were punished. I couldn't stand it. The whole system felt designed to break your spirit, to teach you that your ideas don't matter, that your questions are irrelevant, that your job is to absorb what you're told and repeat it back without thinking. And I rebelled. Not loudly. I wasn't a troublemaker in the traditional sense, but I refused to engage, refused to memorize things that didn't interest me, refused to pretend to care about subjects that seemed pointless. And this made me a terrible student in their eyes, a problem, someone who didn't fit, someone who needed to be fixed or expelled. They chose expelled, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Because once I was out of that system, I could learn the way I wanted to learn. I read physics and philosophy on my own. I worked through problems that interested me. I thought about questions that fascinated me. I discussed ideas with friends who were also curious, also questioning, also unsatisfied with conventional answers. This was real education. Not the forced feeding of pre-digested information, but genuine inquiry, genuine exploration, genuine thinking. And this is what created my ability to see differently, to question assumptions, to imagine impossible things, and then figure out if they might actually be true. The education system didn't give me this. It tried to prevent it. And only by escaping did I develop the intellectual independence that made my work possible. Now, fast forward to today. You'd think we would have learned something in the century since I was in school, that education would have evolved, become more humane, more focused on actual learning rather than obedience. But has it? Look at your schools. What do you see? Standardized curriculum, standardized tests, students sitting in rows, teachers lecturing, memorization, regurgitation, grades based on compliance and the ability to repeat what you've been told, and punishment for deviation, for questioning, for thinking independently. It's the same system, the same prison, just with better technology, smartboards instead of chalkboards. But the fundamental philosophy hasn't changed. Students are still treated as empty vessels to be filled, as raw material to be shaped, not as human beings with innate curiosity and the capacity for self-directed learning. And what's the result? An epidemic of disengagement, students who hate school, who are bored, who go through the motions without genuine interest or understanding, who graduate knowing how to pass tests but not how to think, not how to question, not how to learn on their own. And we call this education? We call this preparing students for the future? But what future? The world is changing faster than ever. The jobs that exist today might not exist in 20 years. The skills that matter are adaptability, creativity, independent thought, the ability to learn new things quickly. And none of these are taught in traditional schools. In fact, they're actively discouraged because the system rewards conformity, rewards following instructions, rewards doing what you're told exactly as you're told to do it. That might have been useful in the industrial age, when we needed factory workers who could follow instructions and do repetitive tasks. But that world is gone. We don't need more obedient workers. We need thinkers, creators, problem solvers, people who can navigate uncertainty and create value in ways we can't even imagine yet. And the education system is producing the opposite. It's producing people trained to wait for instructions, to look for the right answer that someone else has already determined, to avoid risk in creativity and anything that might deviate from the approved path. This is a disaster. We're failing an entire generation. And the tragedy is, it doesn't have to be this way.
Let me tell you about my childhood. Before gymnasium, before the authoritarian nightmare of formal schooling. I grew up in Munich, and my parents, bless them, they gave me freedom. Freedom to explore, to play, to follow my curiosity. My uncle Jakob was an engineer. He would give me algebra problems disguised as games, puzzles to solve. And I loved it, because it wasn't forced. It was play. It was challenge. It was me figuring things out on my own. And my father bought me a compass when I was 5, a simple magnetic compass, and I was mesmerized. Why did the needle always point north? What invisible force was controlling it? This question haunted me, fascinated me, and no one gave me the answer. They let me wonder, let me think, let me develop my own theories. This is real education, exposing a child to interesting phenomena, letting them wonder, letting them question, guiding them gently but never forcing, never giving them answers before they've had a chance to truly grapple with the questions. And this approach, this what we might now call unschooling, this created in me a passion for understanding, a belief that the world was comprehensible but mysterious, that there were patterns to discover, problems to solve, and that I could be the one to discover them. The formal school system nearly killed this passion, nearly convinced me that learning was boring and pointless, and something done to you rather than by you. But I held on to it, barely, and when I escaped the system, that passion reignited, and I became myself again. Now, I know what you're thinking. Einstein, that's a nice story, but we can't all just let our kids run wild. They need structure. They need to learn things. We can't just hope they'll educate themselves. And you're right, sort of. Unschooling doesn't mean no education, doesn't mean no guidance, doesn't mean just leaving children alone and hoping for the best. That's a misunderstanding, a caricature. Real unschooling, real self-directed learning, it's not about the absence of structure, it's about the source of structure. In traditional schooling, structure is imposed from outside, by authorities, by curriculum designers, by people who decided arbitrarily that every child of a certain age should learn certain things in a certain order. But in unschooling, structure emerges from within, from the child's interests, from their questions, from their natural developmental trajectory. And the adult's role isn't to impose learning, but to facilitate it, to provide resources, to answer questions, to create opportunities, to remove obstacles. This is harder than traditional teaching, much harder, because it requires actually paying attention to the individual child, understanding what they're interested in, what they're ready for, what will challenge them without overwhelming them. You can't just follow a textbook, can't just deliver the same lesson to 30 kids and expect it to work. You have to individualize, personalize, meet each child where they are. And that's difficult. That's why the industrial education model was invented. Not because it works better, but because it's scalable. You can process thousands of children through the same system with minimal effort. But the cost is enormous. The cost is the destruction of intrinsic motivation, of curiosity, of the joy of learning.
Let me tell you about something I said once. A quote that people love to repeat but don't really understand. I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious. People think I was being modest, but I was being literal. I wasn't born with some magical ability to understand physics. I wasn't gifted with supernatural intelligence. What I had was curiosity. Deep, relentless, obsessive curiosity, and the willingness to follow that curiosity wherever it led, to spend years thinking about questions that interested me, to fail over and over until I figured something out. That's it. That's the secret. Not talent, not genius, curiosity. And here's the thing. Every child is born curious. Watch a toddler. They're constantly exploring, touching, tasting, asking why. They're natural scientists, natural learners. You don't have to teach a child to be curious. You have to avoid crushing that curiosity. And that's exactly what traditional schooling does. It takes curious children and teaches them that their questions don't matter, that learning is about absorbing information chosen by others, that curiosity is fine in designated times and places but must be suppressed otherwise. We force children to study things they're not interested in, to ignore things they are interested in, to learn on someone else's schedule, not their own. And we wonder why they become disengaged, why they lose their love of learning. We did it to them, systematically, intentionally, and then we blame them for not being motivated. It's insane. Now, I want to pause here and ask you something, because I'm genuinely curious about your experience. Did school kill your curiosity or enhance it? Think back to when you were a child. What were you fascinated by? What questions kept you up at night? And did school help you explore those questions? Or did it tell you to sit down, be quiet, and study what you were told to study? And now, as an adult, are you still curious, still passionate about learning, or did that die somewhere along the way? Leave a comment below. Tell me your story, because I think most people have lost touch with their innate curiosity, have forgotten what it feels like to be genuinely excited about understanding something. And I think the education system is largely responsible. So share your experience. Let's talk about this, because this matters. This is about more than education policy. This is about the quality of human life, about whether we spend our existence engaged and growing or bored and stagnant.
And that choice, fundamentally, is shaped by how we approach learning. So, tell me, what's your relationship with curiosity, with learning? And do you think it could have been different if your education had been different?
Let me tell you what unschooling actually looks like in practice, because there are real examples, real families doing this, real children growing up outside the traditional system and thriving. I'll give you some examples from the modern world. Look at someone like Elon Musk. Now, he went to school, yes, but he educated himself. He was reading encyclopedias at age 9, teaching himself programming, learning engineering from books. His formal schooling was almost irrelevant to his actual education. Or look at the thousands of successful entrepreneurs who dropped out of college or never went, not because they're anti-education, but because they found the traditional system wasn't teaching them what they needed to know. They educated themselves, pursued their interests, built skills through doing, not through classroom instruction. Or look at the growing homeschooling and unschooling movements, families who have opted out entirely. And research shows that these children, on average, perform as well or better than traditionally schooled children on academic measures. But more importantly, they maintain their curiosity, their love of learning, their independence. They're not damaged by being outside the system. If anything, they're benefiting. Now, I'm not saying everyone should unschool. I'm not saying there's one right path for everyone. But I am saying we need to question the assumption that traditional schooling is necessary, that it's the only way, that children who don't go through it are somehow deprived. The evidence doesn't support this, and my own experience certainly doesn't support it. The traditional system assumes children won't learn unless forced, that they need to be compelled, incentivized, threatened, grades, tests, punishment for failure, rewards for compliance. But this is backwards. Children are natural learners. They want to understand the world. They want to develop competence. You don't have to force a child to walk or talk. They do it themselves, driven by intrinsic motivation, the desire to do what they see others doing, to master their environment. And that same motivation applies to everything else. If we create an environment rich in opportunities and resources, children will learn voraciously, enthusiastically, on their own timetable, in their own way, following their own interests, and they'll learn more deeply and retain it better than if we force it on them, because learning driven by curiosity is fundamentally different from learning driven by external pressure. When you're curious, your brain is in a receptive state. You're paying attention, making connections, building deep understanding. But when you're learning to pass a test, to please a teacher, to avoid punishment, your brain is in a different state, stressed, focused on the external reward or punishment rather than the material itself. And the result is shallow learning, information that goes in one ear and out the other, that's forgotten as soon as the test is over. We've all experienced this, cramming for an exam, learning material just long enough to pass, then forgetting it immediately. That's not education, that's a performance, a game, and it's a waste of everyone's time.
Let me tell you about what I think a real education looks like. And I'm basing this on my own experience, on what worked for me, and on what I've observed in others who've become truly educated, truly capable of independent thought and creation. First, there needs to be freedom to explore, to follow your interests, to spend time on what fascinates you and skip what doesn't. This doesn't mean no structure, but it means the structure serves the learner, not the institution. You study mathematics because you're curious about how things work and you need mathematics to understand it, not because mathematics is scheduled for third period on Tuesdays. Second, there needs to be depth. The current system is mile wide and inch deep, touching briefly on hundreds of topics without really understanding any of them. But real learning requires depth, spending weeks or months or years on a single question, really grappling with it, seeing it from every angle, understanding it thoroughly. This is how you develop real expertise, real understanding, not by superficial exposure to everything, but by deep engagement with something. Third, there needs to be play, experimentation, trial and error, the freedom to fail without punishment, because that's how you actually learn, not by being told the right answer, but by trying things, seeing what happens, adjusting, trying again. This is how scientists work, how engineers work, how artists work, how anyone who's actually creating something new works. And children should be learning this way too, especially children, because they're not afraid of failure yet, haven't been taught to see it as shameful. They'll try anything, and if it doesn't work, they'll try something else. That's the mindset we should be nurturing, not crushing. Fourth, there needs to be mentorship. Not teaching in the traditional sense, not lecturing, not imposing knowledge, but guiding, answering questions, providing resources, modeling curiosity and intellectual rigor. I had mentors, my uncle, later professors who actually cared about thinking, not just about following the curriculum. These people didn't teach me, they showed me what it looked like to be intellectually alive, to care about ideas, to wrestle with problems. And that example, that modeling, was more educational than any formal instruction. Fifth, there needs to be real-world connection. Learning shouldn't be abstract and disconnected from life. It should emerge from life, from real questions, real problems, real applications. When I was working at the patent office, I was learning about mechanics, electricity, engineering, not from textbooks, but from seeing how things actually worked in practice, from evaluating whether inventions would actually function. This grounded my understanding, made it real, and children should have the same opportunity to see how knowledge connects to the real world, how it's useful, how it's meaningful, not just abstract symbols on a page, but tools for understanding and navigating reality. And finally, there needs to be community. Learning doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in conversation, in collaboration, in debate and discussion. My friends and I, we formed the Olympia Academy, just a few people who met regularly to discuss ideas, to argue about philosophy and science, to challenge each other's thinking. This was more educational than any classroom I ever sat in, because it was active, engaged, collaborative, everyone contributing, everyone learning from everyone else. This is what education should look like, and none of it requires a traditional school. All of it can happen outside that system, in families, in communities, with the resources we have available today.
Speaking of resources, let me tell you how lucky you are, how much easier this is now than it was in my time. When I was young, if you wanted to learn something, you needed books, and books were expensive, hard to access. Libraries existed but were limited. If you lived in a small town, you were stuck with whatever happened to be in that library. But now you have the internet. You have access to virtually all human knowledge, for free, or nearly free. Want to learn physics? There are online courses, video lectures, interactive simulations, forums where you can ask questions and discuss with other learners and experts. Want to learn programming? There are tutorials, practice platforms, open source projects you can contribute to. Want to learn art, music, languages, history, philosophy, anything? It's all there, all available, all accessible. The barrier to learning has never been lower. The only thing standing between someone and education is motivation, and internet access, obviously. But for those who have access, the opportunities are unprecedented.
And yet, we're still forcing children through the same outdated system, making them sit in classrooms learning things they could learn better and faster on their own, wasting their time and their potential. And beyond just information access, we have tools for creation, for experimentation, software for making music, art, games, simulations, hardware for building robots, electronics, scientific instruments, communities for sharing work and getting feedback, mentorship available online from people anywhere in the world. This is revolutionary. This is the democratization of education. Anyone, anywhere, with motivation and internet access can educate themselves to a world-class level, for free. This wasn't possible in my time, wasn't possible even 20 years ago, but it's possible now, and we should be taking advantage of it, should be teaching children how to learn independently, how to find resources, how to evaluate information, how to teach themselves whatever they need to know. These are the skills that matter, not memorizing facts, not regurgitating information on tests, but the ability to identify what you need to learn and then go learn it. That's the meta skill, the skill that underlies all others, and it's not taught in traditional schools, because traditional schools are built on the assumption that learning requires teachers, requires institutions, requires someone to give you knowledge. But that's not true anymore, if it ever was. Learning requires curiosity, resources, time, and guidance. But the guidance doesn't have to come from a certified teacher in a classroom. It can come from anyone, from parents, from online mentors, from peers, from books and videos and tutorials. The teacher as sole source of knowledge is obsolete, and we need to update our model of education to reflect this reality.
Now let me tell you what I think needs to happen, how we need to reimagine education. First, we need to stop treating all children the same. Stop assuming that every child should learn the same things at the same age in the same way. Individuality matters. One child is fascinated by dinosaurs and learns to read because they want to read books about dinosaurs. Another child couldn't care less about dinosaurs but loves building things and learns mathematics through construction projects. Another child is socially oriented and learns best through collaboration and discussion. We need to honor these differences. Meet children where they are. Let them learn in ways that work for them. This doesn't mean chaos, doesn't mean no standards, but it means flexibility, personalization, recognizing that there are many paths to competence and understanding. Second, we need to stop using grades and tests as the primary measure of learning. These measure compliance and short-term retention, not understanding, not skill, not the ability to apply knowledge in novel situations. We need better assessment methods, portfolios, projects, demonstrations of actual competence. And we need to recognize that learning is not a competition, that one student doing well doesn't mean another is doing poorly, that we can have collaboration instead of competition, mutual support instead of ranking and sorting. Third, we need to involve children in real work, real projects, real problems. Apprenticeships, internships, opportunities to contribute to something meaningful. Not just pretend work, not just exercises, but actual participation in the adult world. This gives learning purpose, context, meaning, and it teaches skills that matter. Responsibility, collaboration, communication, problem-solving in real situations with real constraints. Fourth, we need to trust learners more. Trust that they want to learn, that they are capable of directing their own education with appropriate support. Stop treating education as something done to children and start treating it as something children do with adults as facilitators and guides. This is a fundamental shift from authoritarian to partnership, from control to trust, from teaching to facilitating learning.
It's scary for many adults, requires giving up control, accepting uncertainty, but it's necessary, because the old model doesn't work, produces compliance, not competence, obedience, not understanding. And fifth, we need to start this young, very young. Don't wait until children are school age to start treating them as learners. From birth, children are learning constantly, and we should be supporting that, creating rich environments, answering questions, providing opportunities, not trying to control or rush or optimize, just facilitating the natural learning that children do. If we do this, if we honor children's innate drive to learn and competence, we won't need to force education later. It will emerge naturally, joyfully, as part of life, not as a separate, mandatory, unpleasant thing that has to be imposed.
Let me tell you what I dream of, but I think could be possible if we get this right. I dream of a generation of children who never lose their curiosity, who grow into adults still excited about learning, still asking questions, still exploring, still creating. I dream of people who are educated not because they passed through a system, but because they pursued their interests deeply and developed real competence. I dream of a world where education is a joy, not a burden, where learning is something people do throughout their lives, not something that stops when you get your diploma, where everyone has access to knowledge and the tools to pursue their passions. This is possible, more possible now than ever before in human history. The only obstacle is our attachment to the old system, our fear of change, our belief that education must look a certain way because that's how it's always been done. But it hasn't always been done this way. Compulsory schooling is a relatively recent invention. For most of human history, learning happened through apprenticeship, through family, through community, through direct engagement with life. And people learned, became competent, created civilizations. We don't need the current system. We chose it, and we can choose something different, something better, something that actually serves learners instead of institutions. So here's my challenge to you. Whether you're a parent, a teacher, an administrator, a policymaker, or just someone who cares about the future, question the assumptions. Ask yourself why we do education the way we do it, whether it's actually working, whether there might be better ways, and start experimenting. If you're a parent, give your children more freedom, more choice, more opportunity to direct their own learning, even within the constraints of the system. If you're a teacher, find ways to honor student interests, to facilitate inquiry, to step back and let students struggle and discover instead of always providing answers. If you're an administrator or policymaker, support innovation, support alternatives, stop mandating one-size-fits-all solutions, create space for different approaches, for personalization, for learner-directed education. And if you're a student trapped in a system that's not serving you, know this: you can educate yourself. The system is not the only path. Learn what you need to learn to satisfy the requirements, but don't let that be the limit of your education. Pursue your real interests, ask your real questions, teach yourself what matters to you, because that's what I did, and that's what made me who I became. Not the system, but my own curiosity, my own drive, my own refusal to let others dictate what and how I learned. You have that same capacity, that same right, that same opportunity. Don't waste it waiting for someone to give you permission. Take responsibility for your own education, starting now, starting today.
This is what I would tell you about education if I were alive today. That the system is broken, that it's crushing the very qualities we should be nurturing, that we have the tools and knowledge to do something completely different, something better, and that the only thing stopping us is inertia and fear. But we can overcome that. We can create a new model, one that actually serves learners, that produces capable, curious, creative human beings, not obedient workers, not test takers, but thinkers, creators, people who can navigate an uncertain future because they know how to learn, how to adapt, how to think independently. That's what education should be. That's what unschooling, properly understood, offers. Not the absence of education, but education that's real, personal, meaningful, effective. Education that honors the human spirit instead of trying to break it. That's the revolution we need, and it starts with you, with your choices, with your willingness to question, to experiment, to do something different. So make that choice, question the system, try something new, and help create the education revolution that this generation desperately needs. Because they deserve better, and the future deserves better, and it's up to us to make it happen. Hit subscribe to keep questioning everything we've been told.